Good evening, all, or I guess good morning for my friends in Lochac and others of you living in the future. And welcome to Kal-bardr's Corner for this episode of Coffee with Kal. I am Baron Kal-bardr Gellir, Companion of the Meridian Cross, Companion of the Argent Comet, Companion of the Pilgrim Star, Companion of the Palmer's Lantern, Defender of the West, and Reaper. Coming to you live from the Shire of Vulpine Reach in the misty mountains of Meridies. Joining me this week in this special time slot are two friends from way down under. Welcoming back to the show, Count Alain, who this time came with some backup in the form of his consort, Countess Safiya. Good morning, Your Excellencies.
Hey, Cal.
Good morning.
If you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us who you are and why you're in fact awesome.
You must start.
All right, sure. So I am Countess Safiya. I hail from the peaceful and mercantile barony of St. Florian de la Riviere. And I like to think I'm the better half of this one.
Fair and reasonable. I am Count Alain, also from the peaceful and mercantile barony of St. Florian de la Riviere, and I imported Saf from the barony of Rowaney, which is about 1,000 kilometers south of us.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the show, both of you. I think you have something special from the from Lochac tradition to do it for us.
Yeah, so I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the various lands on which we're gathered today, and to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. For those watching, that is something that is I think pivotal to the culture down there, and something that we try to do when we have guests from out of kingdom for us. So thank you for allowing us to be part of that culture with you.
Sharing it.
And for those watching, I know it's weird to have coffee for me at 9 o'clock at night, but we're having coffee because this is a coffee themed show, dang it. So that's what we're doing. So today's coffee for me, I have a neat one actually to show off. It itself is a normal, just really good coffee, but this is the special edition apocalyptic roast from The Turned Coffee. It is a Colombian roast. It is a roast level of 3 zombie hands, which is a weird way to determine your roast levels, frankly. But Keith and I picked this up at Fan Expo over in New Orleans a couple weekends ago. And all their coffee is comic zombie themed because they also have a comic book. So they do coffee and comics, and I've never heard of a more brilliant combo, frankly. But you can check them out. I think volume 2 of their comic just released this last week. At Facebook as The Turned Comic, or Instagram or Twitter, I think is all the same, at The Turned Comic. Check them out. Throw them your awesome monies. This coffee is amazing. I love it. And it's, apocalyptic. The funniest one I didn't get it because it's decaf, but it's the Skeleton Crew is their decaf one because you're shaking like a skeleton. And I was like, that's brilliant. Or no, that was the over-caffeinated one. The zombie one was their decaf one because you're zombies. I was like, that. I appreciate their naming conventions, frankly. So,
That's awesome.
So what are you guys drinking this morning on your lovely Sunday morning in this case?
So ironically, neither of us are actually drinking coffee right now. So I'm currently drinking Lipton iced tea in my Green Dragon mug.
Ooh. Appreciate the Gulf War shout out for the Green Dragon there. Nice.
I did have an iced latte with a scoop of ice cream in it earlier this morning, but I'm being semi-responsible and just have water for the show.
I appreciate the semi-responsible there, at least for that.
Oh yeah, never completely responsible.
That's right. All right. So that's the fun stuff out of the way. For those watching out there, please let us know who you are, where you're from. We have probably some new people watching tonight because of the weird time slot. So let us know in the comments or the chat, depending on which platform you're watching on, who you are, where you're from. If you have questions during the show, please drop them in there as well, and we'll happily address them as is proper. Now, quick disclaimer, just if this is, I know the word BOD is in the title of this show. This is not an SCA show. We are all speaking for ourselves and our own opinions. Some of this obviously will be from my guest time as Crown, since that's where this came from. But this is very much our opinions on the matter. And none of this is for SCA Incorporated, either the US side or the Australian side or New Zealand side of the world. So just getting that out of the way. So the topic on the table is the BOD Variance Request. And that's a giant broad topic. And was a bit of a hot button for at least on my Facebook for a couple weeks there. And so I'm curious from you guys. I want to sort of hear the story. Like I've seen some of the TikToks that Safiya you put out and seen some of the stories, but I want to hear what was your goal? What was the letter you sent to them? What were you hoping to get out of it? Like, start us somewhere and we'll go from there.
Yeah, okay. Where to start? Probably the beginning, I guess. So it's been a topic that's been discussed on and off in Lochac. So Lochac, for those who I guess aren't aware, is mundanely Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. So between the two, we actually have two boards, which does add extra levels of complexity. But it's something that had been discussed because obviously we are a very large geographic area, but a very small population density. So we tend to be, I guess, an amplified version of some of the issues that we see in the wider known world. And we had sort of been thinking about it for a while. And when we stepped up as Crown Prince and Princess, we decided that we wanted to contact the boards and see at the board and the committee and see what was possible.
Yeah, and I suppose the reason that we started there is being an affiliated group with the SCA in the US. There's a whole bunch of mundane legal, basically contracts that allow us to use the SCA's IP and follow their rules, but break some of their rules. You know, we don't have to contact the US board for, group advancements and a couple of other things. And because we do follow Corpora, we went, all right, what's the best legal way to sort of start sorting through how we might be able to do this if we wanted to? And I think the board sort of came back to us with two options, which is one, we can ask the US board, hey, can we do this thing if we wanted to and get some sort of variance in our agreements? Or do we start at the local level, come up with a solution that's acceptable to most people, and then try and get that specific solution passed by the US board?
Okay. Yeah. So let's start with that. So you did get an answer back initially of some options when you started this.
Well, so our board and our committee discussed it, and we were quite happy for them to lead it because obviously this is a very long-term project, and we would only be Crown for 6 months. So there's a lot of work to do. And obviously us as the Crown at the time are not going to be the best people to carry that forward. Right. So when we spoke to our boards, they said, look, these are your two options. We think that it would probably be easiest and better to future-proof anything to see what the US board actually has to say on the matter and what they would be willing to allow. And so we didn't hear back from them. So we didn't have any direct contact with the US board. We only communicated through our board and committee. And so we didn't actually hear back, and I believe they didn't hear back until just after we had stepped down as Crown.
So there was sort of a couple of months locally going back and forward on what wording that people wanted. Then it was sent across to the US. And then, I think the answer came back either just before or just as we stepped down at the end of October.
Yeah, so based on the explosion, it was right. The timing was right. Okay, so you said the wording. So let's start with the request you sent up. So the request was what? It was to just give you a blanket permission thing. Like what was your ask initially?
Yeah. So what we had asked of our board and committee was to just explore what our options were in terms of alternate crowns. So we had floated the suggestion initially of a fencing crown. But we'd sort of left it open to their discretion because obviously they know the legal intricacies of all of these contracts because it's this triangle between the three associations. So each of our boards has a contract with the US board, and they also have one between each other. So there's a lot of
because that's not hard at all. Right. Let's not make this game any harder than because I deal with I see the US politics of this. I cannot imagine adding 3 layers of politics on this and getting anything done. I envy and pity you at the same time for that. So kudos, frankly.
Yeah. So, I mean, thankfully, like the board and the committee took most of that. So, and they're all competent. So we were like, this is great. We can just sit back and direct. It's wonderful. Sign our name at the bottom. And so they went back and forth for a couple of months, like Alain said, and they came up with the general wording of an extra clause that would just allow us in Lochac to determine our own crown selection format. And that's basically it. It's a very vaguely worded sort of thing because it's designed to be a catch-all.
Right.
And we already have a precedent for variations in our affiliation agreements that say that we can create our own subgroups and all that kind of stuff.
So you almost have to because of the distance in the cultural differences and
there's a whole lot of extra stuff that would make that complicated if we had to go to the US board for everything.
Yeah. And the board would probably get sick of us too. So,
frankly, it's easier for them. It just y'all play over there. We'll holler if you need us, which in this case you did. Okay, so when you were putting together the letter, so you said you talked to your boards and consulted them. At any point, did you take a read of the populace, like of your population? Has that been discussed? I know that conversation has come up with the idea of alternate crowns in the U.S. a couple thousand times, and it gets blown to hell every time it's came up from various directions. So what was your population's response to your idea, or did you really do that at all?
So we didn't consult the populace at this stage, and there's actually which board published it? The Australian board published their actual communication directly with the US board that actually outlines why we chose not to go through with populace consultation, and specifically because it is such a controversial topic, and it has in the past gotten incredibly heated. And the fact that because we had worded the request to the change in such a way that it was deliberately not committing us to one course of action or another, we didn't feel there was a need to consult the populace on allowing us an extra opportunity when we then have consultation on what specific opportunity we would like to take. So obviously that has been received differently across a bunch of different demographics, and we acknowledge that obviously is not something that worked for a lot of people, but yeah, that's sort of the reason that we've gone with that.
And sort of expanding on what I mentioned before, like one of the things that came up for both us and the board was the potential damage to the groups in Lochac of, if we did get a concrete solution with exact definitions of what was going to happen and boundaries and restrictions and that sort of thing, took it to the board, and then they said no anyway. We sort of saw this as an easier option to go, hey, can we do this, and then figure out the specifics later on.
And that would give us a much bigger timeline to work through it. So rather than saying in the next 6 months we need to have a concrete answer for this, we could say we've already got options. Let's discuss it for the next 6 months, the next year, the next 5 years, whatever it takes to get a solution that Lochac is happy with moving forward.
So the goal is unlocking the door, but not opening the door yet.
That was the intent, because even if the variance had been signed and our affiliation agreements change, kingdom law still needs to be updated to allow anything else to happen, and that's a big conversation that needs the Crown and the seneschal and populace support to go through.
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit here, more than I already have. Frankly, if you were king and queen of the world, what would you have done? What do you want to happen in Lochac for your crown selections? Like, what was your, if you had total control, what would you have done?
I think for me, this would be as far as I would want to go by myself, because obviously I'm not, assuming that I'm not omnipotent in this situation. I don't know what suits every demographic best. And, you know, both of us are cis white folks in a heterosexual relationship. So we're obviously missing a lot of nuance that other people's lived experience within the SCA involves. And so I wouldn't want to speak for them on that. I think the goal is not, for us at least, was not to necessarily change our traditions, change our processes straight away, but to really start that conversation and start working towards a practical solution that obviously makes more people within the SCA feel involved and engaged and supported and represented by the Crown.
That was a fantastic answer. I love when I throw a bus at people and they're just like, no, I'm just going to put that bus there. Just no, stop it, Cal. I think that's smart. I think and also that's what I look for in crowns. And so kudos to you. I not surprised based on my conversation with Alain previously and what I've seen of you guys, that mentality that being there is really interesting, and it works well for representatives. So we had a question, and I'm actually going to divert this question for a second because I think this makes sense, and I'm curious of your opinions on so you already have a different culture. You already have a different, you're using, you're a subset of the SCA. You're sort of using parts of the SCA, and you have to make changes. So the question was, as the SCA grows outside of the US, how much change until it becomes a different thing, right? That's the summation here. And is this another step in this, or would that, had this went forward, would this have been another step towards this becoming a new thing?
I mean, it's a very Ship of Theseus kind of question, really.
Right. John can be counted on for the good questions. That's why I like keeping her out there.
I don't know. I think we have a tendency, and sorry, I'm just like dominating this conversation. I have a lot of opinions, in case you haven't noticed.
Elaine's like, this is great. I'm just going to hang out. This is so good for me.
So I think it's one of the things that we tend to get really bogged down in very specific aspects of the SCA. And I love the traditions around Crown. I love the culture that we've built up, and I guess some of the magic that comes from it. But I also think that the SCA is much bigger and broader already than just a Crown Tourney format. And I think if, Crown Tourney is the only thing that makes the SCA for you, then I think you're missing out on a lot of what the SCA has to offer. Like we have artisans, we have fighters, we have people who are just here to hang out. And I think we shouldn't be discounting all of their experiences within the SCA. So yeah, that's my answer. That doesn't really, I guess, give you any clear direction, but I feel like ancient philosophers have been going on this for ages. So
yeah, so I was talking to one of the knights here in Meridies yesterday. Had a similar idea of was very against the idea of changing Crown ad hoc, and we talked about that a little bit and sort of got the idea. I was able to express to him that it's not the idea that necessarily we want to change Crown or that's the goal. It's that we're trying to be more inclusive in the thoughts around it, and making sure that I'm as someone who's sat as Crown, making sure that the Crown has the correct power, is in the right spots and doing the right things if we're going to keep it in that realm, or if we're not, changing that direction. So I've always seen that there's a couple different options with that, and I think changing Crown is one of them in this case. And I was glad I finally at least got to okay, I understand that from him, which is frankly impressive for so many people I've talked to. But yeah, you're right in the fact that the SCA is a much larger place than Crown. Our crowns are important, and I think a pivotal part to the medieval experience. But you're right; it's not all we are. It's definitely not who we are as a hobby, as a club, as a 501c3, or whatever designation you go by in various areas. I think that's the important parts we look at, and this is just one of those things.
Yeah, and it's something that I think Elaine can speak to. But our experience as Crown, and we all sort of know that Crown is not just standing up the front of court and talking at people and giving out awards, and there is a lot more service that should underpin that. And yeah, just our experience as being Crown and meeting with so many different people from different facets of the SCA, some that we'd never experienced before, was really eye-opening to see how much our patronage as Crown actually meant to them. Like, you had some really...
Yeah, there was some really interesting moments where, when you're like sitting vigil for a period, you get a whole bunch of advice, and one of those pieces of advice is like, you will be someone's first Knight, Pelican, Laurel, Master of Defense one day, and the same thing applies to Crown. But actually having someone come up and go, hey, it was really impactful that you were present and engaged for whatever the activity was, or you were my first Crown, like that aspect of it was really quite something. And it's one of those things that, when we were considering this, made me go, yeah, I want more people to be able to have this opportunity.
Right. And so, Alain, to piggyback off of that, as a rattan fighter, that was your path to peerage in this case. And how would you feel seeing, coming in as a newcomer, seeing a Laurel as the reigning Crown, or a Pelican through right of skill, however that come to be? I still haven't figured out how to get a good service-based Crown tournament yet. I've been trying to come up with a good option. Haven't come up with one yet. But let's theorize that that's happened. Like, how do you see that?
For me, Crown isn't about how you get there. The way it works in my head is like, the moment I win the tournament, that's my bit done. Like, that's my moment of glory, and the culmination of the work I put in. From that moment that the last blow is struck and I'm declared victor, being Crown is about everybody else in the kingdom. So as long as that person is fulfilling that role, making those moments of magic for someone else, yeah, I don't think I really mind about how they got there, as long as it was, conducted fairly and all the other things that we expect of the competition to decide Crown.
And I think to add to that, the least interesting thing about me as Crown should be how well my partner hits stick.
Agreed. I mean, he's good at it, obviously. He's done it a couple times, right? But
no shade.
but you're right, and that's interesting. So to switch sides of that, Safiya, I think I've heard a lot of the arguments people have come up with when people start discussing the DEI aspects of changing Crown, or those sort of conversations come up, is, well, what about the consort? We have these consorts. These consorts are amazing, and yes, we agree. These consorts are amazing. Like, you guys do, I'll say, probably more of the work than the people swinging the stick do a lot of times. Not to discount my brothers in arms, but I've seen a lot of consorts who do good and keep doing good. Our Order of the Rose is just phenomenal, at least here in Meridies. I won't speak for the whole known world, but so when these conversations started up, and when you were involved in these conversations, did you feel at any point, as the consort, as the queen, as the princess, discounted in these conversations?
I haven't actually felt discounted in the conversations. I think where I have noticed that the arguments around consorts fall down is that, well, anyone can be a consort. And that's true, but no one reigns as an individual. Right. You are reigning as a partnership, and you need to be able to rely on your partner. You need to trust that the person who currently hits stick good is also someone who is going to be able to lead well, who is going to be able to support you in your journey, who you will be able to support through their journey, and who can also engage with the populace in a way that works for you as, a unit. So I think it's this false dichotomy of you're either sovereign or you're consort, rather than you are both half of Crown.
Right. It's why I often try to, like, I don't often separate the two, because I don't think they are. So I think the term Crown in this case is the best way to refer to our people, the people reigning, because they are up here. I think that is a great way to put that. I'm trying to think I'm carefully tiptoeing around ideas here without being like, I don't want to be that guy to throw more buses at you here. What's next? for Lochac for this petition. So the petition came back, was basically told no, from what I read.
Yes.
So what was the response? What do you think of that? And then what's the general opinion of?
Look, I think the response certainly could have been a lot better. 2 sentences is not something that shows that they've seriously considered our proposal, that they're willing to actually listen to our proposal. And that was quite disheartening. Do you have something to add?
What's next is an interesting question, because obviously the board came back and basically said, please provide a detailed plan. So now it's a question of how does this become a conversation that we have with the whole kingdom, who drives that, what does that sort of organization look like? So the what's next, I think, is largely, and I'm not sure at this point.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is that, we are no longer Crown, and we don't want to impose ourselves on that process without actually being invited to impose ourselves on that process. So obviously it does sit with our board and committee, and there'll be, I imagine, quite a lot of backstage work for that, because obviously we've talked about the affiliation agreements and all of that sort of stuff, but also culturally, there is a difference to some extent between our 2 mundane nations and how we interact with our authoritative bodies, how we interact culturally with each other. So there's a lot of untangling to do in that sphere, I think, before we set down some really concrete steps. But obviously, our plan had been that if our proposal to the US was approved, that we would then be able to open to populist consultation. And obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into designing surveys to get meaningful data. So I don't know if you remember several years back where we had everyone in the SCA wanted to have a survey and none of us knew how to actually write surveys. So obviously we want to make sure that we are capturing a full and accurate representation of what people want within the SCA.
Right. So the response wasn't no. The response was basically go with the other option that you had. So you had 2 options initially, was blanket openness or here's a plan. Basically, they just said, okay, come back to us with a plan. It wasn't the no that because like I said, when I first saw it, I saw no was the response I saw.
Yeah, it was a no to that specific variant, and hey, maybe come back with a full plan. It then becomes theorizing down the track whether we, the kingdom, if it does decide to go that way, ends up with us still asking for that variance, but here's the detailed plan. Because obviously, if you write the detailed plan into our affiliation agreements, then, if that needs to change in 5 years when something else becomes apparent or we figure out a better system, then we have to go through the whole process again. So yeah, it's an interesting.
Yeah, and I guess, like, speaking from a personal standpoint, I found the response quite dismissive. It said, not yet in words, but reading between the lines, our board and committee had asked for additional feedback. They'd asked for questions. They'd asked for any concerns that might be there. And to just say, no, we don't feel it's the right time, I think was the wording that really got me.
Yeah, that's what I read too, which is where I saw the giant no too. So I'm glad we're on the same page, at least, of how I read that. Not speaking ill of my board, but I saw it.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, no one's perfect at communication all the time, and perhaps that was not the way it was intended. That was certainly the way it came across, though, and I think it maybe would have benefited from a proofread before it was sent out.
I often get told, and I stick my own foot in my mouth, and my ladies will agree with this, that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I get told that 1,000 times a day because I often say things dumbly, apparently. I'm a very blunt project manager mundanely, and apparently I can't business at the SCA all the time, and that's a hard track for me. So I get it. And like I said, I can read between the lines and also understand their mentality. I've also seen some of the other communication they've sent out around other recent hullabaloos. This is not it's not an uncommon thing for communication to be not great from that end of the world. So I get that. So shifting back to the sort of the next steps, we had a comment here that I think is really relevant. The risk is creating a lot of work and discourse for another no in this case. I assume that fear is there, and you know, not throwing you at the Crown list bus, but you know, assuming you're involved in that process and maybe running for Crown or fighting for Crown again at some point. Like, can you envision that work, and like, would that be a work that you want to take on?
So,
oh God, oh, there's stuff. Please continue.
Yeah. So look, we did talk about this a lot, and especially because I'm prone to overthinking like literally everything. We talked about this a lot while we were going through that process, and especially when we'd sort of heard about the response from the SCA Inc. board. So I think ideally we'd like to see sort of a roadmap. This project management, essentially, this isn't just a yes or no question. Right. This is a qualitative question. And so I think at each point we'd like to see, I think at the very least, a concrete roadmap for, at this stage we will be surveying based on blah, and then there will be a review period, and then we'll be doing whatever the next survey step is, or legal consultation, whatever it is. And having a clear map to how we get there, regardless of what the actual outcome is. And I think if that's explicit, that gives people a lot more room to express their specific opinions. Because obviously the last thing we want to do is phrase a question in such a way that people go, oh, well, I am in favor of scenario X, but this seems to also include scenario Y, which I'm not in favor of, so I'm going to vote no. And vice versa. So we really, I think, need to come up with something that would capture the diversity of responses, and whether that is, you know, allowing people multiple options. So would you support an alternate Crown selection that was, I don't know, a cook-off, or tag?
An iron sewing chair. Yeah, tag. That's fun. I mean, it's all tag based. Who can serve the most hours at the war? I've come up with 1,000 problems that are just not great. Like, I swing stick, and I'm like, I can't come up with another good option other than this. And it's fair, other than a fencing, you know, rapier based. That's easy at the tournament. There's an obvious winner. That's an easy one. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the option that I quite like would be something like a champion system as a first step. I mean, I think the important thing is to realize that no solution is going to be perfect, because we do suffer from perfection paralysis within the SCA as, you know, a whole organization, in that we get caught up in saying, well, every solution that we come up with has to be completely perfect, rather than saying, well, maybe the solution just needs to be better than the one we've got.
Like we don't need to get everything right now. There is, you know, we've got years ahead of us in the SCA, and I think if we can continue having those conversations, like even if we make a slight change now to improve it for some subset of people, that's better than doing nothing until we have a perfect solution.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 55 years now, and we've gotten a lot has changed since then. We can keep changing. I think that's that's the whole DEI conversation we're having. Is let's look at the accessibility is the keyword there of little bits and bits, because it's not 100%, but you know, 55 is still better than 50. We're working towards that 100. That's the goal, right? Hit the nail on the head with the comment about perfection paralysis, and I think the strive for excellence, not perfection, on my mug is pretty point for this conversation there. So
very apt.
Yeah, I saw that mug in the cabinet. I was like, I'm going to borrow that one for the show. It's a good one. And we've had that show. That's actually a topic on the shows before. Is it doesn't have to be perfect, and you know, I think moving forward is definitely an option. You know, and I think we talked about this last time. Alain, the idea when we looked towards when mods were created and the knighthood had that divisive idea around that. I almost see that as the death knell of some of these conversations, because that was the sort of initial split in the market.
Yeah, that was a time.
You just went, yep, that happened. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, I wish that conversation had happened differently and there'd been a different result. Like, I think perhaps the SCA would be in a better spot if we did have an omnibus martial peerage. Right. Like, that would simplify a lot of things and perhaps have set us up for some better conversations at this point. But we've got what we've got now, and I think it would be incredibly difficult and almost impossible to like make that happen at this point.
Right. Yeah, I think that's going back is hard. I think that, and
Yeah.
honestly, that's the idea of changing the Crown tournament is almost. I know a lot of people I've talked to have see it as going back and changing the start, and that's weird. I disagree with that.
Yeah.
We've changed in 55 years, right? We're no longer in the backyards in Berkeley having a party, like.
And like even if we look at the start, yes, though the first event was a tournament, but there was all the other things that make up the SCA there at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't just hit stick in backyard. It was, we are dressing up to have a tournament. We are having musicians. There is dancing. There is food. There are all the other aspects of the SCA that have been there from the start. And I think also it sort of speaks to some of the attitudes within the SCA that they aren't really factoring in the work that all of our various other peers and members of the populace who have never attained peerage have put into building the 55 years of the SCA. So yeah, something to reflect on, perhaps.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this question at you for that. Do you think there not being a path to peerage or a path to crown for those other people is detrimental for them? So yourself included in this. As a non-retained fighter, do you feel like it is detrimental that you don't have a path to crown by your own hand?
Not for me personally. I am in an incredibly privileged position that we're dating, and Alain happens to be quite a good fighter, at least good enough to win a crown. So that's not really been, I guess, a risk in my experience that I would maybe want to serve as crown and not be able to. Whether it's by my own hand is sort of irrelevant to me. I have never been, I'm interested in fighting, but I've never been interested enough to follow it through and really maintain that. And I think that it's
nice fortune.
And yeah, I think it's one of those things where it doesn't really affect me personally. But obviously that's not the case. Like, and the fact that we could afford to reign is, right, I guess, another thing that we've been able to do, because reigning is expensive. So what happens to those people who aren't in a romantic relationship with a fighter, who can't fight themselves, who don't have necessarily the financial stability to be able to support ruling as crown? All the other factors that I probably haven't even thought of when I've kind of thought about barriers to crown. So I think I'm probably not the person to ask about that question. I think there are probably much better opinions that you could be seeking.
Fair enough, and clever dodge. So I think you're right there with the idea of the barriers to crown, right? That's a lot of this conversation is as well. And I think that's a lot of what the DEI's offices are talking about. If you're interested in that, look up your local DEI office. I know our society, at least, is still filling that position. So if you're interested in that, please apply with the BOD. Go to the website. I don't know the links currently for that. But also start at your local level. Find people that are doing this locally, because I know our local and here Meridies officers are just doing a bang up job with making sure we're having those conversations around that. We can't change the system currently. We can't. We've made the request. They've said no for now. But we can make changes on those local levels in small ways to start that step. Again, it's not perfect, but it's getting better. So I think that's great. And I want to see more of that, even if we can't upturn the apple cart, so to speak, and change it at the top. Let's change what we can. Which I'm hoping the two of you are going to continue doing on your local levels as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so. Yeah, that would be really awesome for us to kind of do that work. Yeah,
it's about finding those little bits and pieces and seeing what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So we had so obviously we mentioned Fortune's comment. My lovely Harold just went out there. I Fortune, appreciate you watching. But we did have an interesting comment that for those maybe putting together a proposal in the future, maybe a portfolio approach to a new crown concept. Just gonna let that ruminate out there. It's an idea. I'd like to see more of that from Helen. So Helen, if you want to put that together, I'd like to see that. And that's honestly a good question, sort of as a next steps. And again, not speaking for your crown, or I'm sure you talk to your heirs before you step down or when you're doing this. But maybe as the next steps, was there any conversation with anybody in the U.S.? Because we've had the same conversation, and there's those of us who'd like to see this change as well. And as you're putting together these surveys and sort of doing the what comes next, is there something on this side of the pond to have that conversation with as well, so that it's not just you guys making a change, it's a SCA change being made?
Yeah, like I can definitely see the advantages from that, and I've seen a number of conversations from people who've already thought out a whole bunch of stuff in different aspects. And I think, if you have more people on board, the US BOD is more likely to think about it more seriously than, five kingdoms are better than one. And if you're putting this sort of thing forward, I think it presents some interesting, technical challenges, because if a US kingdom were to push for this, it would require a corpora change, because you all fall under the one BOD. So there's some things there, but I definitely think if we get to the point of putting a proposal together and having it ready, then having support from other kingdoms would be a valuable thing.
I think it would also be really interesting to see the cultural differences, because obviously Lochac is both a geographically and a culturally isolated test case that would kind of make it ideal to trial something like this. So yeah, I would be really interested to see more of the conversations across the different kingdoms. And I don't know much about, I haven't traveled much outside of Lochac. I've been to one Pennsic several years ago, and that's kind of been it. So my experience with other kingdoms is very limited. So it'd be really cool to see some of the different opinions and processes and stuff.
I'm just throwing Gulf Wars is coming up, so
yes, I have heard Elaine's Gulf Wars stories so many times. I could probably repeat them to you word for word.
I'm just saying, I know some people. I'll make sure you have a good time. That's it. Gulf Wars is not a slouch. I haven't been to Pennsic yet. I'm hoping to make Pennsic 50 this year, but that's my home. So actually, mundanely, I live about an hour and 15 from the Gulf Wars site.
Yeah.
So it's not a terrible spot to be in for that. At least I can day trip over and do stuff I need to. I forgot my pillow. I'll just go home and grab it. It's fine. It's not good. I've done that before. So, okay. So I'm gonna speaking of Gulf Wars, I'll roll into some plugs real quick. So coming up at Gulf Wars, myself and Duke James the Holy, or the Sloppy Gob and Kal-bardr's Corner, are sponsoring a special People's Parade at Gulf Wars. You fancy, nobly people get to do all your big opening ceremony stuff, and we said that's stupid. We want to have our own parade, so we're gonna have our own parade. So Tuesday night, the night after opening ceremonies, we will be lining up outside of Shadow Legion and Nova and doing a People's Parade. So if you're familiar with Mardi Gras or sort of the carnival culture, basically we're gonna show up in goofy made-up floats and throw beads and bourbon at people, and it's gonna be a hootenanny. So look that up out on Kal-bardr's Corner. We've got the event out there, and the Gulf Wars SCA group actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'll co-host this and promote it on our stuff for you." I was like, "We were being funny. This is the greatest thing ever." So the actual official Gulf Wars page is signed up to promote it for us, and that's funny to me. Anywho, check that out. Follow us for more updates. I know I've talking to Kisa and a couple others, and she's gonna start sharing her float ideas and costume stuff and get people jazzed up. Why are people calling me? Stop calling me. I'm doing shows. But back here before March, that's March 14th, which I don't know if it's actually Kisa's birthday. So who knows Kisa from these shows from Thirsty Thursdays, it's her birthday night as well. So I'm sure she'll be extra party-tastic that night. But coming up next on Coffee with Cal in 2 weeks, so Sunday after next, back on my regular time, I'll be joined by the Honorable Noble Eleanor Ashicombe from Caid, talking about standing up and speaking up. I found two lovely hot button issues, the BOD variance being one of them, and Eleanor's being the other from out in Caid. I won't go into details, but the idea of just speaking out against injustice and problems when you see them, I think as someone who I've never been crowned, but I want to hear when there's problems, and I want to hear when I do something wrong, or when the crown does something wrong, or our fealty oath is to speak and to be silent. And I'm happy to hear that this noble has decided to speak in this case. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what their opinions are and sort of what went on in Caid recently, for those who haven't been following that. So we'll check that out. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/KK Productions. Join the grand wall of patrons. Some awesome rewards will be going out. I'll be actually working on those when I get back to down into South Downs land. So check those out coming up. But if you don't want to join the Grand Wall patrons, you can look us up on Redbubble, search KK Productions. I did just put out a new Creating Community Equals Creating Safe Space sticker out there. Look that up. If you have ideas for stickers or other silly stuff I can add to the Redbubble, please send them my way. I love having artists, and I do commission work, so you get percentages off the stickers of the stuff sell of your art. I definitely do not want to profit from your works. If you want to follow me on TikTok, please do so at Kal-bardr. Your Excellencies, anything to promote over in your side of the world?
What's coming up next? I
don't know. Rowaney Festival is our biggest kingdom event happening just after Easter. It's a fair travel, but we have had guests from all over the known world in previous years. So maybe not for this year, but if you are interested in future years, check it out. And we will help you out with any support. We're a pretty hospitable kingdom, and we'll get you sorted.
Yeah. Oh, and Canterbury Fair, which is currently happening in Southern Guard, which is over in Aotearoa. So that looks super awesome, and we're really sad not to be going. But raining is expensive. So,
so I was watching Elaine's travel and things. I was like, dude, I don't know how you could afford. Like, I travel a lot. But
look,
dang,
you only need one kidney.
Look, I will say we're very lucky. So our kingdom provides a travel fund for the Crown, which covers about half our costs. So yeah, we've got a fair bit of support from the kingdom, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just been hard with international travel at the moment. So currently there are only 2 carriers flying to Aotearoa. So so it's a little bit pricey, but it is well worth the trip. From what I hear, I've never actually been to Canterbury Fair myself, but we had a really lovely time over in the Crescent Isles, and we would encourage anyone else to go.
It's probably
really
the
nice.
Most relaxed event in the kingdom. It runs for about a week and a half, and it's just a great time.
And I'm told there are hedgehogs?
Yes, there are hedgehogs.
There are hedgehogs. I really want to see the hedgehogs. I think that would be amazing.
I'm pretty sure I heard Kisa squealing from downstairs. So I guess I'm going to Canterbury Festival soon. That's a thing. Rowaney Fair has been on my list. That's like Gulf Wars, Pensick, Rowaney Fair. That's I got to hit the trifecta of big events. So that's coming soon. What else? I had something else I was going to bring up. Oh, speaking of stickers, I'm going to bring this back up because I don't think you guys may have missed this. It is Lochac, not Lolcat, by the way. We had a previous show that was a conversation on, so I still want a Lochac sticker. So if you want to draw that up, it's a fun. I can't concept it, but if it comes up, make that happen, somebody, please. Also, Your Excellency Alain, I want to do a shout out to you for your work on TikTok that you did during your reign. All your travels were interesting, but the stuff you did through the regalia was phenomenal. I love that.
I'm glad people enjoyed that. It was kind of amusing because I went, I literally have almost every piece of Kingdom regalia in my house at the moment.
So check that out. It's at Books and Swords, right? Books and Swords. So check that out at Books and Sword on TikTok. It's interesting to see. So my lady Runa is our Kingdom Regalia coordinator. So I've seen a lot of our regalia that doesn't see the light of day a lot from doing inventory, and then getting to see what you did on that was cool. Looking comparisons and sort of seeing bits and pieces, and in some of the conversations around them was interesting too. So thank you for that, and hope to see more TikToks from both of you and following the journeys as it is. So. Final thoughts. Let's do some wrap up final thoughts. I asked you both to be on here. So my final thought for this is I won these conversations, right? I think this is an important conversation to be had, and I wanted to dispel a lot of the rumors. I know when I first saw the request, I followed you guys, so I knew it was coming. I knew some things were happening, but didn't know the impact. Didn't really know what it was going to be until I saw the response from the BOD. And my initial thing was, well, that's shitty. And you know, I consider you guys my friends. I was like, they hurt my friends, and now I'm sad about it, right? But I also then heard the responses from people around here, and I'll say the two of you were villainized a little bit for it. Frankly, you shouldn't be. I think that's not fair. But as the Crown, you often know the targets, and I think we saw that. So I wanted to have you both on to talk about that to get your faces out and get your words out, so we hear you talking. And Safiya, I love the TikToks you've done. So this conversation you started around it. So thank you for that emotional work you've put in, labor you put in. I know it's not easy. So thank you both for having this conversation. Thank you both for being on. Again, no, it's not easy. So what are your final thoughts? If you had to sort of sum up your experience with this in a couple sentences, what's your thoughts?
It's been positive on the whole. I think there's been some really good conversations. The thing that sticks out for me at the moment is that I would encourage people in my community, the armored combat community, to be willing to listen to people and actively be open. Like, you don't have to change your mind, but you do have to listen to people. And I would encourage those people very strongly to listen with an open ear and hear what people are saying, if, you know, about some of the things that aren't working for them, and consider those.
Yeah, okay. I have to be succinct.
We got time, please. I love hearing you talk. You're very intelligent in your speech, so this is great for me. Please continue.
Yeah, so I guess it's like Alain said, it is about listening, and it is about having the conversation. And I think to some extent having the conversation as much as we can without judgment, because obviously this is an incredibly emotive topic for a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of emotional processing that everyone has to go through, especially when we're talking about something that involves like loss of privilege or change to privileges. And it's okay if you need time to kind of sit with it and just work through it yourself. But at the same time, I also feel like it's one of those things where tradition is wonderful and tradition is a large part of what we do within the SCA. But tradition, and I've said it before, so I probably sound like a broken record, tradition has to come with self-reflection. And your own unprocessed stuff is not a reason to stop others from being involved, from being engaged and included. And I think that's what makes the SCA really beautiful, is that there is so much scope for all of these different facets. And I think they should, as much as we can, represent all of them within the institution of Crown.
Well said.
Thank you.
I'm gonna leave you with a silly quip. I was always told that tradition is just peer pressure from dead people, and I was like, that's accurate. That tracks. Awesome. Well, folks, those out there watching, I think you just heard two pieces of great advice. Please take them to heart and really listen to conversations that are happening, whether they're on the idea of Crown variants or insert fill in the blank DEI based topic here. Accessibility is the key. I think that's the idea. So please have those conversations. If you are in a privileged community, please listen to those feedbacks because it's hard. Your Excellencies, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on this morning or late at night for me, this morning for you. You guys are always welcome back here on the channel. I'd love to have you, stop by whenever.
Thank you so much for having us.
For those out there watching, tune in a couple weeks for another episode of Coffee with Cal. But for now, that, my friends, is an empty cup. I've been Kal-bardr. They've been Alain and Safiya. And y'all have a good night. Thanks, everybody.